Have you ever had somebody in your life who you look up to more than just about anybody? Somebody who seems really perfect to you and you kind of want to grow up to be just like them? If you've ever had somebody in your life like this, which I hope you have, then you may be able to relate to my tribute today. I'm going to be telling you about my great-grandmother, my Mama Tucky. My great-grandmother was a very determined, devoted, and kind person, and I'm going to tell you about how. So my great-grandmother, her name was Helen Corinne Bowling. She was born on December 2nd of 1925, and she lived until May 7th of 2018. She had an amazing 92 years before she passed away, surrounded by her family. The first thing I want to tell you about is how determined my grandmother was. She was the second youngest child out of 8 children, and she was always determined to make sure that life was a good one. She grew up on a farm in a poor family, so she had to do a lot of chores and a lot of work, but she never complained. She used to tell us a story about how her father would always leave one apple at the top of a golden delicious tree every harvest. So every harvest, she would climb to the top of this tree and sit at it and just eat the apple and watch over the farm. She managed to find joy in the smallest of things because she was determined to make her life a good one. She was even determined to make sure her life was good for her siblings. She taught herself how to cook at a very young age because she wanted to help her mom care for her other siblings. Even though she was one of the youngest, she made sure the older ones had as good of a life as they could get. She was really determined to make sure that everyone around her had a good life. And that kind of brings me into my next point. Now that I've talked about how determined she is, I want to tell you how devoted she was to her family. On December 22nd of 1944, my great-grandmother married my Papa Jobo. They were high school sweethearts, and she was under 21, so she actually had to get her father's permission. But she was okay with that because she was so devoted to this man and she knew she wanted to marry him. They went on to have a really big family: 2 kids, 7 grandkids, 20 great-grandkids, and 3 great-great-grandkids. Even though we were all really far apart from each other, my great-grandma always made sure that I knew the name of all 15 or so of my cousins and second cousins. She would sit with me probably twice a week and just draw out a family tree so that I could understand who my family was. Every family reunion was held wherever she lived because she was really at the center of our family. She was even so devoted to us that when she was getting older and knew she may pass soon, she recorded this book for us. This book is a recording of the very first Christmas story, and when you open it up and go through the pages, it's her voice reading it. So now, even 4 years after she's passed away, we can still hear her voice reading us a story. Another important thing, I think, about my grandmother is how devoted to her family she was, even before she got older. She cared for her grandmother-in-law, so her husband's grandma, her mother-in-law, her own mother, and eventually her husband. She cared for all of them whenever they got sick, up until the point where they passed away. She devoted so much of her life just to making sure all of these people had the best life that they could possibly have. The last thing I want to tell you about is how kind my grandmother is. I think what shows the most about how kind she was is how many people just truly loved her and liked being around her because she just had this presence. When I was growing up, my brother and I would go over to her house every day after school. We would always play there, and she would play with us. She would play board games with us, or even stuff like hide and seek, even though she was probably in her 80s at this point. She always made sure that we had fun, and she'd have snacks for us and for our friends. My friend Sydney would come over, and she'd throw us a tea party with celery sticks and peanut butter. My brother and his friends would come over, and she'd make sure they all had all the snacks that they could eat. And that's a lot for a bunch of preteen boys. I even found out recently that some of my brother's friends would go over there without my brother to go see my grandma. She was so kind to them that she entertained them even though she probably couldn't really remember their names. Not because she didn't care, but because she was older. But she was so kind that she would sit with these boys and just make sure they had a place to be, and at least they're not out on the street, they're safe with her, and that's how she saw it, because she was kind. So, now that I've told you about how determined, devoted, and kind my grandmother is, I hope you can see why I saw her as such a big role model in my life. I think that she was a really good person. I never saw her overly angry, and I never heard her say a bad word about anyone. Even now, when I'm 21 years old and my grandma has been gone for about 4 years, she still has such an influence on my life. I still try every day to make her proud and to be more like her. So, I hope all of you in your lives get to have a Mamaw Tucky, and if you don't worry, because mine would have gladly accepted you. Thank you.